Hello Zimbabweans, my name is Samuel Takaura and welcome to yet another exciting episode on Citizen Voice Network. And today we're joined by Advocate Innocent Gonese, who is a veteran when it comes to opposition politics in the country. I think most of you know Advocate Gonese is a member of Parliament and for Mutare Central. I think he served for close to 5 terms. And today we want to discuss the opposition then versus the opposition now, Parliament then and Parliament now, on and sharing insights on what really went wrong within the opposition and some of the roles that he played within the opposition in terms of the Parliament. And we understand that Advocate Gonese, at one point you were a chief whip within the Parliament. Service to say that the introduction that I gave might not be enough. You can introduce yourself, Advocate Gonese.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, fellow Zimbabweans. My name is Innocent Gonese. I am a father of 4 and married to one wife, and all my children are from the same mother. I was in politics for quite some time, from 1999 to the time I retired from all forms of politics in October of 2023. But in terms of Parliament, I did not stand for both the internal processes in the CCC or for the national elections in 2023. So I voluntarily retired from politics so as to give others a chance to carry on the torch. And I'm a practicing lawyer. I practice both in Mutare and here in Harare. Here in Harare, I'm under the name and style of Lawmen Law Chambers, and in Mutare, it's Gonese and Law Legal Practitioners.
Thank you so much, Advocate Gonese. How would you describe the role and influence of opposition during your time?
During our time, it was very, very vibrant. And I think it's also a question of our leadership. Just like what happens in ZANU-PF, we also had our party caucuses, and we also had strong leadership. And positions would be taken on a principle, and members of Parliament would adhere to those principles. We also had our strategies and so on, and then we would put our best feet forward in terms of those legislators who would have impact, who would be able to be forceful and so on. That is what was obtaining during my time. But unfortunately, now we've got a lot of changes in the dynamic in the country. Firstly, as you've already pointed out, there's been a weakness or a weakening of the opposition, and I've also highlighted it in the sense that there was a lot of infiltration in the opposition ranks, to the extent that you then get surprised that you were thinking you were alone with somebody. All of a sudden, you see that person now defecting, and then you start wondering whether it's a real defection or whether that person has all along been part of the system. But more importantly, you get to the situation now where the opposition, as I see it, obviously I'm no longer in it, and I retired completely, so I don't know exactly what happens behind the scene. But from the outside, it is clear that it is rudderless. There's no proper shape, and unfortunately, because of the infiltration and because of the interferences and so on, you now, as I read from outside, you have several factions within the same party calling itself the CCC. And because of that lack of cohesion, that lack of leadership, it becomes impossible really to have any effectiveness. And it appears to me that a lot of the legislators may have been compromised.
Honorable Gonese, so when you resigned, had you seen the signs that this ship is heading towards a disaster?
Right, I want to correct you. I did not resign. I did not contest the elections. And at that time, I remained a part of the movement. I actually helped my successor to campaign in Mutare Central. I was still part of the process. So when I retired, it had nothing to do with foretelling the future or anything of that sort. At that time, it was mainly for personal reasons. Obviously, when you've been in politics for 23 years, it takes its toll on your family life. and I realized that I had not been giving enough attention to my family. That is number one. But again, I also wanted to debunk the culture that people take politics as a career. It is not a career. I am a legal practitioner. I qualified at the University of Zimbabwe, and during the period when I was in politics, I actually had my degree almost redundant. So I felt that before I fully retire, let me give the part of my life to full-time legal practice, which I had not been doing for the 24 years I was in politics. So that was also part of the reason. But the events which subsequently happened were not in my contemplation. I did not expect them. They also took me by surprise. But in 2023, around September, October, I felt that with the situation as it was then, it was time to leave politics completely, which is actually what I did. So I want to emphasize that when I initially did not contest, I did not intend to retire from all forms of politics. What I wanted to do was to take a back seat. But now, in September, October, I felt that, look, I'd given my time, and sometimes it's also important to know when to leave the dance floor.
How would you describe the character of Parliament? We're looking at its composition. Has anything changed in terms of the quality of debate, the independence, and respect of different views?
I don't think in terms of independence, as you put it, let's try to again have a distinction between the legislators who are from the governing party and the legislators who are from the opposition. I've already indicated that from the outside, it appears that there's been a lot of compromising. Their position is definitely compromised. When you look at the recalls which took place in 2023 to 2024, they totally have got no logic whatsoever. And I am actually puzzled at the court judgments which were then given. Because in my view, when the elections were conducted in 2023, it was clear that the leader of the opposition was Nelson Chamisa. And then to have a situation where some other person gets the power to recall legislators who were all elected under the leadership of Nelson Chamisa, to me, it was really nonsensical. But where we are now looking at the situation which I've already alluded to, where it doesn't seem to appear like there's any clear structure. As I said, from the outside, it looks like there are three distinct groupings. But the critical thing now is that the vibrance is gone. You get topical issues, they seem to be ignored. Right now, we've had a lot of information about, not information, but there's a lot of talk about those tenderpreneurs, people who just don't seem to have any discernible, business which they are operating. All of a sudden, they are billionaires. And the opposition seems to be very quiet. Or at least if they are saying anything, it's not loud enough. And that is really something which is very unfortunate. And there are so many issues which I think they should be tackling in a more forceful way.
In your own view, Honorable / Advocate Gonese, do you think we still have opposition leaders that have people at heart, or it's now people that have been overtaken by personal ambition and survival of politics?
I think it's very difficult to tell, because there are definitely some sincere people who are there. But when you've got when there's no form, then there will be no substance. I don't know whether they are getting my sense. Because you really need to have cohesion. You really need to have, a proper structure which can become effective. That is what I think is lacking. Otherwise, there are definitely, in my view, men and women of integrity who are still out there. But because of what has happened, it's very difficult for them to be very effective. There may also be some people who are outside mainstream politics who are trying to come to the forefront. The problem which we have, in my opinion, is that of Africa. It's not just about Zimbabwe. We have got politics of personalities when you should have politics of principles. And the unfortunate thing is that people follow individuals and not principles. You look at the recent example of Malawi, right? there was that vice president, Saulos Chilima, who died in an air crash. His party did not do so well. It was very clear that the party was centered around his person, around his name. That is why people ended up going back to Peter Mutharika. I'm just giving that as an example. That is something, the problem of Africa, generally speaking. People follow individuals. So I think that is the same illness or malaise which is affecting us as Zimbabweans. Right now, if people could coalesce around a certain principle and then come up with a formidable opposition, it could work. But because people are now, or rather not now, people have always been following a particular name because of charisma or whatever it is. So that is the reason why, in my opinion, we are not going to have a vibrant opposition anytime soon.
Honorable Gonese, as opposition stewards, opposition legislators, you have always talked of reforms. Could Parliament be an avenue to push for reforms? Because you talk of reforms when you're outside, but the moment that you're inside, there isn't much talk, or there is talk, but I think there is no one that listens to those calls. So what can we draw from this? Because the moment you are still outside, there is talk of reforms, and the moment you are in Parliament, or people are confused to the extent that we think it's a vehicle that can be used to push for reforms.
I think that there were efforts to get the reforms, but because of the numbers, it did not work out. I think during the time when we went for elections in 2013, we did try to push for those reforms. It was not successful because of the intransigence of Robert Mugabe. In 2018, it was really a similar situation. I tried to move amendments to the Electoral Act during the process of the electoral amendments, but we're not successful because of the lack of numbers. But I think right now the challenge is not so much that people are not trying to push for reforms, but when it comes to the current situation, obviously there's been a difference. There's now been a paradigm shift in terms of how those legislators, I think, are behaving in Parliament. But when it comes to reforms, you really need the political will. And when there's no political will, particularly from those who are in control, it becomes extremely difficult, which is why there should be oneness among the people of Zimbabwe. But I also believe that we are also to blame as a people. I'm not talking of the politicians. You are looking at the people. We are too docile as Zimbabweans, generally speaking. So people are content to be posting things on WhatsApp, on Twitter, on Facebook, and so on, instead of confronting the real problem. And in terms of reform, Jonathan Moyo, I think, had a famous saying that no one would ever reform themselves out of power. So if those reforms are likely to result in the weakening of the governing party, definitely they are not interested in them. And it is now incumbent upon the people of Zimbabwe themselves, if they want to have a change in their livelihoods, who are supposed to be pushing for those reforms. But if they are not willing, you can take a donkey to the river, but if it doesn't want to drink the water, you can't do anything about it.
Given your experience so far, do you think that elections without reforms in Zimbabwe would yield an acceptable result?
Yes and no. I would say yes if there's unity of purpose. If all people put their hands on the deck, if all Zimbabweans were to come under the banner of some strong movement, yes, it can happen. It almost happened in 2008, but they interfered. But to me, in 2008 itself, if there had been no split in 2005, I have no doubt in my mind that they would not have been able to do any gerrymandering to prevent or to circumvent the will of the people. But the movement itself in 2008 had been weakened 3 years before. And unfortunately, towards the elections, there were moves to try to get the two MDCs to contest as one, which failed. So to me, obviously, there will be divisions, and those divisions are really our problem. So to me, yes, if all the conditions are met. No, if you are looking at the context in which we are, I don't foresee, because you see, I've heard some clamoring for people to come together and so on. Where there is no meeting of the minds, it will not work. So as it stands, apart from the infiltration, apart from the interference, I think that the opposition leaders themselves, especially the ones who are trying to continue with something which they've already failed to do, I think they should do the honorable thing. If they could stand down and then perhaps allow younger people, people who don't have, baggage behind them, people who have not been compromised previously, people who still have got, or who have got the goodwill where people can really identify with them. But right now, if you look at, I will not mention names, but I'll just tell you that as a matter of principle, most of the leaders who have been at the forefront of the opposition have lost credibility with the majority of the people. And as such, it is difficult for me to fathom a scenario where any of them will be able to unite the opposition.
But do you think that there is any amount of pressure that will lead to ZANU-PF to give in to electoral reforms?
I don't think so. This is the reason why I said that if the people of Zimbabwe were to come together, get a proper leadership to guide them, with or without reforms, I believe that it is possible. In fact, in a lot of countries it has happened where there's been no reforms, but the very force of change is forced those who are in power not to be able to wriggle their way and remain in power.
And you spoke of infiltration. How does infiltration happen? If you have insights, I think it can happen even at a cell level, at a ward level, at a provincial level, at national level. How do you allow infiltration? How, in your own understanding or from experience as a leader within the movement, how would infiltration happen?
Well, you don't expect that a person who is an infiltrator will come with a red robe written infiltrator so that people can identify them from afar. Some of them will be even at the forefront or say certain things. You may not be able to tell who it is. You see, infiltration is a sophisticated process, but you can only see it in hindsight that this person from the subsequent behavior. But also some of the divisions will be instigated by people whom you don't think are infiltrators. So as I said, it's a sophisticated game. You've got the intelligence which is at the disposal of those who are in power. And it happens not just in Zimbabwe, but everywhere. So you cannot be able to really say that these are the... All I can tell you is that the signs, the symptoms are clear that there will have been infiltration. It has not happened only to the MTC, to a lot of political parties. Not just in Zimbabwe, but elsewhere as well. But in Zimbabwe, it's very clear that this is what has happened. What has happened to the state of the opposition now, it's clear. And that infiltration includes lawfare, where cases are taken to court and bizarre judgments are then issued. And then in that case, what can you say? It is so clear, it's so glaring. So it is not very... You see, infiltration cannot be avoided completely. But if you have got a movement, if you have got a political party which has got proper structures in place, which is then able to collectively deal with conflict situations. But see, some conflict situations can be handled better when people have got those mechanisms and the desire to make things work. But if someone who is at the forefront, who is an infiltrator, is involved, then we find that some of the issues which are minor, which are petty, cannot be resolved. And when they are not resolved, this is what then leads to the divisions.
Honorable Gonese, you touched on a question that I wanted to ask, but I think in passing, do you think the fragmentation that is within the opposition, if all the parties were to unite, do you think that will bring a desired outcome in terms of the opposition?
I've already said to you, not in so many words, but that was the implication, but now I will reiterate it. It's not about having all the opposition. I'll give you an analogy. You know what we have in Shona? We call it mbodza. Badly cooked sads. If you have 10 of those mbodzas and you put them together, they become good sadza. So that's where the problem is. So in my view, at this point in time, I think we really need something afresh, something new. That's what I think is required. Because right now, those people have got their egos. They've had their differences. And it's not possible, in my opinion, for them to unite on anything. I hope I've made myself clear.
Yes,
so to me,
clear.
the panacea is not to get small bits and pieces and put them together. No. I think you really need what happened in 1998 to 1999, where people start, and they don't start by just forming a political party. They should start identifying a cause, then try to get people to participate, and thereafter, in 2000, MDC had a Congress after just 4 months, which was from September to January, to get legitimate leadership. Most of the other political parties have never had a Congress. So you must have that democratic culture permeating through all the structures of a political party. And that is the reason why, in my opinion, we need to start, or rather, they need to start afresh. Who will be in the background, because I will never return to politics.
Honorable Gonese, in your last days or in your last term, I think recalls were a thing then, and there was a call for a massive resignation by the masses, massive resignation of legislators to say leave Parliament. But you were one of the legislators, or the legislators. I think during that term, we didn't see any resignation. Is it safe to say that you were in it for, or legislators are in it for money, or to recoup? Some say legislators want to recoup the cost that they would have incurred during the campaign period. What's your comment on that?
First of all, I want to ask, well, rather, since you're asking me, let me just respond. When you say the masses, what the yardstick that the masses have said is, because you see, when you've got social media, so you can never really say that there is a common position which was ever taken. But during my time, towards the end of the 9th Parliament, I'm not aware of any such calls for resignation. What I've heard, or what I did hear, was resignations after 2023. There were calls for resignations in 2020 after the Supreme Court judgments. But the political party took a decision that people should not resign in mass, but rather that people should be recalled. And some were recalled, some were not recalled. But as you are aware, even those who were not recalled still identified themselves openly. You remember when we were in Parliament, we were very clear that we were part of the CCC.
The MDC Alliance then.
Yes, at that time it was the MDC Alliance. We were very clear that we were behind the leadership of Nelson Chamisa, notwithstanding that there was no resignation. But as I'm saying, that the political party is the one which took the decision that, look, members should wait to be recalled and not resign. Definitely, if people had been asked to resign, some of us would have resigned, but we were never asked to resign by the party. But yes, there were outpourings of feelings, sentiments to that effect, but unfortunately they were not like one in unison throughout the country. But there were also some people even outside the party who felt that people should not give up their political space voluntarily, but rather that if they wanted to recall, let them recall. Those of us were still attending caucuses. Not at Harvest House. After the Supreme Court judgment, I never set foot at Harvest House. We were attending caucuses at various places. And more importantly, we're going to political rallies. Addressed by Nelson Chamisa, we're very clear. Our identity was very clear.
As we wrap up, Honorable Advocate Gonese, as you reflect on your journey, what gives you hope and what still concerns you about Zimbabwe's political future?
I'm not sure if there's anything which gives me hope about Zimbabwe's political future. At the present moment, it looks like there's all doom and gloom. But I would yearn for a situation where the younger people, I'm talking of those who are in their early 20s up to 40, to really come to the party. I know that it's not going to be easy, But as Joshua Ngomo once said, that the future of Zimbabwe will be in safe hands, and it will be the youth who will save it. That's my fervent hope. But otherwise, at the present moment, I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. It doesn't seem to be there at all. And if there was any flicker of light, looks like there's a big train blocking it.
At what stage in your life did you start politics? Were you still a youth then?
Yes and no. I had two phases in my political life. The first one was in the late 1970s. I was at Gogomeri High School, and I was actually supportive of the at that time ZANU was banned, but when our school was closed, I really participated in the people's movement. I'm not sure whether you've heard about it. Up to the time that I went to university. But when I then went to university, the country was now liberated. That phase of my life was at an end. Then I restarted by supporting the opposition without participating actively. I voted for Zoom in 1990. I was attending Edgar Tekeri's rallies and all his meetings in Mutare, but I was not an office holder. It was only in 1999 that I joined mainstream politics as an active participant. So you can see there have been several phases in terms of my political life.
But say kwenyu sei vechidiki vasiri kupinda mune zvematongero enyika kuti vagadzirisewo ramangwana ravo.
Chiri kunetsa ndechekuti vanhu vakawanda valuza hope. Havasisina chivimbo chekuti pane chinobuda. You know, people have been trying. It's only that these days it has been difficult to go into the European countries. It had not been for that, thousands would have left. But yes, zvakunetsa kuti wane visa racho. Even kumacaregivers zvekupi kuna UK, kuna Poland, kwese kwakunetsa kuenda. Ndofunga kuti vanhu vana vechidiki vazhinji vada kutsvaga zviri nyore. And zvinotyisa nokuti kuita zvematongerwo enyika munyika yakaita seZimbabwe hazvina kumira zvakanaka. Saka zvinhu zvokuti ndofunga vana vakawanda vada kutsvaga kaupenyu kakavanyorovera. Ndokanoita kuti vanhu vazongofunga kuti so long life kana ndiri mupenyu ndo chinhu chakakosha, because unogona kuzovhiringidzwa mune zvakawanda.
But do you think there will come a time where, or there will come an incident that will spark young people with enough is enough?
I think if we continue on this trajectory, we'll get to our Sarajevo moment, like what sparked the First World War. I think it can happen, because right now, with the level of corruption we are witnessing and things like that, I think we can get to that stage. But unfortunately, I cannot give you a time frame.
Advocate, looking at the opposition in the early years, you said you were the early years of 1999, the 2000, the opposition back then was vibrant. What would have gone wrong, or what went wrong with regards to the opposition? And now it's being described as dead and docile.
Yes, I can start by saying that obviously in 1999, there was that impetus. We had the scenario where virtually from the time of the merger of ZANU and ZAPU, or rather it was now ZANU-PF and ZAPU, under the banner and style of ZANU-PF in 1987, we then had a period where there was virtually no opposition politics. If you recall, in both 1990 and 1995, I think ZANU-PF swept about 117 out of the 120 seats. And in both of those elections, the opposition legislators were just three. I think two were from a political party, and Margaret Dongo came in as an independent. But be that as it may, there were the food riots in 1998. Obviously, the economy had stagnated. And at that time, the people of Zimbabwe were yearning for a vibrant political force. And I think what was also more important was the process. Unlike other parties, which are, someone just wakes up one morning with a handful of people around them, they hold a press conference, and they say they formed a political party. With the MDC, it was a totally different ballgame. There was a long process of consultation. You remember there was also the fight for constitutional change under the banner of the NCA. So you had a lot of organizations coming together, the students' movement, the women's coalition, the workers were the vanguard of the opposition, that is the ZCTU. and people from other walks of life. And as a result, when the MDC was eventually formed, it had already gone to the rural areas, to the towns, and so on, to consult people on the way forward. And the answer was unanimous, that a new political force was needed. And you also remember that Robert Mugabe also said to the late Gibson Sibanda and to the late Morgan Tsvangirai that if you want to form a political party, go ahead and form a political party, because when they were advocating for workers' rights, they were now being accused of meddling in politics. So I think that that genesis, that foundation, led to the formation of a very vibrant movement. Unfortunately, over the years, there were so many challenges and difficulties, and the main challenge was obviously infiltration and interference by the governing party, which is ZANU-PF, but there were also internal problems within the movement, which led to several splits. I think we are aware that there was a split in 2005, then there were subsequent splits in 2014, and so on and so forth. So I think that contributed to the, I wouldn't say demise, but to the weakening of the opposition as a vibrant force. And you know that what then happened in 2023-24 is really a tragedy, where you then had a situation where some people from Norway started claiming ownership of the movement, resulting in the current state of affairs.
Honorable Gonese, in your own understanding, in 2000 and in the elections around 2008, did the MDC win elections at that point, and why then did it fail to take over the reins?
Without a doubt, the MDC won the elections in 2008. We are aware that the largest number of seats. We are also aware that after a period of, was it 6 weeks, where ZEC was claiming to be doing meticulous verification, the result which came out, notwithstanding that we do not accept the credibility of that pronouncement, but notwithstanding all the shenanigans, Morgan Tsvangirai was ahead of Robert Mugabe. So there's no doubt in my mind that he did not only win the election, but I think that period gave them time to manipulate the results in such a way that they then claimed that he had not attained the necessary 50% plus one of the vote which was required in terms of the constitution. So in terms of the ground, it was definitely not level. You had the media coverage was totally biased. You know what ZBC has been doing over the years. You know, some people used to call it at the time either the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation or the ZANU Broadcasting Corporation.
Honorable Gonese, let me interject. Was it because that the opposition, you guys in the opposition, were power hungry that you went into bed with ZANU-PF? Why did you compromise?
Yes, I think you are very aware of the situation that was obtaining in the country. You are aware of the infamous events of the 27th of June 2008. And you also know the stance which was taken both by the by the African Union and the SADC. They all urged Morgan Tsvangirai in the interest of the people of Zimbabwe. There was a lot of reluctance on our part because we felt very strongly that we could not go into bed with the loser of the election. But I think the circumstances at the time, particularly the regional initiatives, the continental initiatives, and even internationally, people come to a stage where they realized that, look, ZANU-PF was never going to give up power, and they felt that perhaps if a government of national unity, if a GNU was formed, then perhaps as the opposition would have time to regroup, and hopefully we were expecting that in the next elections we were going to succeed. But that did not come to pass. But in response to your question, it was not really a question of power. I know there was a lot of debate. I was in the national executive at the time. There was intense discussion and dialogue. Obviously, there were pros and cons, but ultimately, it was the interests of the people of Zimbabwe which were at the forefront.
Is it safe to say that that was at the end of the day a wrong move, or it served its purpose then?
In hindsight, one might think that it could have been a wrong move, but you must also take into account the economic malaise that was facing the country. You remember that was the time when the Zimbabwean dollar had totally lost its value, and it needed something to give. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on one's perspective, that was a necessary move. But obviously, in hindsight, people can always second guess. But I think at the time, considering the exigencies which obtained at that point in time, that was the correct move.
So when that happened, and you subsequently was in Parliament, what was the state of Parliament in terms of opposition participation? We want to look at the then and now, comparing to now. Did Parliament serve its purpose with regards to opposition legislators?
Well, I'm not sure whether they are referring to the period of the GNU, because at that point in time, there was really no opposition, although on the ground, ZANU-PF continued behaving like it has always done. But you must also look at the period before 2008, because I was the chief whip.
Let's go to
I was the chief whip from 2000 up to 2018, as a matter of fact. So you'll find that when we went in, there was polarization, because it was for the first time, in 2000 again, we won the elections. But there was that sort of violence, the farm invasions, all those shenanigans were done in order to prevent the ascension to power of the movement for democratic change. So by the time we went to Parliament, there was a lot of hostility. And that continued up to 2007, when, Morgan Tsvangirai was then assaulted viciously, which then gave rise to the dialogue, which eventually led to the harmonized elections. But when we come to the period after 2008, you're talking of the duration of the GNU, technically, there was no opposition in the sense that we were also in government. But in reality, we're still regarded as the opposition. I'll give you an example. I moved a private member's bill for the amendment of the Public Order and Security Act. That amendment, through a private member's bill, passed in the National Assembly, where we had the majority together with the support from the smaller MDC. But when it came to the Senate, there was a brick wall, which means that we were still treated as the opposition. Then after the success of my private member's bill, we had also another bill lined up in terms of our local government. This was then blocked when the representations were then made to Robert Mugabe that this was not in the interest, I think, of their party and so on, to allow private members to be bringing up bills. So my point really is that during the period of the GNU, there was obviously a relaxation of the situation. We also had our ministers who were part of government, and obviously because of that, there was some difference between the way or the polarization which was obtaining at the time. Because remember, bills were now coming from the same government, as a result of which all the bills would then eventually sail through, although as opposition, or not really opposition, but as the legislators from the MDC were still critical of all those executive decisions which we felt were not in the interest of the people of Zimbabwe.
Honorable Gonese, I want to touch on the issue of, we'll get back to our main focus of the day, but I want us to dwell on, for a moment, on issues to do with public consultations and what the public says during public consultations and what is then reflected. Because for example, the Broadcasting Services Act, I think there were consultations and people widely, there were provisions within that amendment that people didn't want. I think the one that compels people to pay radio licenses by yes, but within those public hearings, people would have rebuked those provisions, why then do we end up having such provisions being carried forward without, despite the fact that people have resisted those? It's just one out of the many.
Yes, I'm very aware of what you're talking about.
Why is it because MPs sleeping on duty? What really happens?
I think one must also understand the dynamics and the political structure of our country. You are aware that you've got section 129(1)(k), which allows recall of members of parliament by a political party, which unfortunately we're not able to get rid of during the COPAC consultations. And I think that provision does not have any place in a democratic society. But be that as it may, the second issue which you must also be cognizant of is that although there's a doctrine of separation of powers between the legislature and the executive and the judiciary, you then find that in real terms, the legislature is the weakest of all those three branches, for the simple reason that the structure of our democracy is that the same party which is governing is the same party which has got some backbenchers, some members of parliament. So as a result of the impact of section 129(1)(k), all those legislators do not have any independence. And when you have got a minority, when the opposition is in a minority, which has been the case in almost all of the time that I was in parliament, you then get a situation where what the ruling party wants, the ruling party will get. They can whip their MPs in their party caucuses. And as a result, although the committee would have come up with a report, that report can be ignored. And then there are also instances where the governing party legislators will not be supportive of whatever positions would have been taken by the people, as a result of which the report would then be weakened and whittled down. So even though some of the recommendations will come out very clearly, the executive can dictate through their numbers, because it's really a game of numbers. So at all times during my tenure as a legislator, the ruling party was always in the majority, save for the period of the government of national unity. The recall provision gives power to a political party, because ZANU-PF, if it is a governing party, it whips its members to toe the line. So when people are toeing the line, there's no point in calling them when they're actually toeing the line and doing what the big wigs require. ZANU-PF has also recalled the members, and I agree with you that it may not have used it as often as the opposition. But the fact is that if there's a bad piece of legislation, it does not become good because the opposition has used it. I'm talking of the principle. The principle is that in other jurisdictions, I'll give you an example of the United States of America. You will find that during the impeachment of Donald Trump, some members, or at least a member of the Republican Party, actually voted for the impeachment, and nothing happened to that member because they have no provision for recall. And if we had no provisions for recall, some of the legislators from the governing party would have the courage to say out what they think and what they prefer. But what I'm saying now is that that power is like a sword of Damocles. It's actually hanging on the neck of any person who wants to oppose what their party wants. So that is where the challenge is.
Thank you so much, Honorable Advocate Gonesa, for your time.
Yeah,
it was
welcome.
A pleasure talking to you.
I haven't been doing this sort of thing. I'm now used more to prepare heads of argument and to appear before their lordships and their worships at the Majesty's Court, their lordships in the High Court.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.